2026, baby! And we are back. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Jennifer. And we are a middle aged couple with a Regal Unlimited subscription, the ability to speak English, and a deep fetish for movie theater popcorn.
And apparently a complete inability to find a movie we wanted to see for the last 3 weeks, because this is our first movie of January, on January 19th. And, well, I guess it was worth the wait.
Yeah.
It was a good movie.
Yeah.
We went and saw The Testament of Anne Lee, which you already know because you clicked on this video, which is a biopic and a musical and a historical movie and a bunch of other things. And it's a big deal. This is going to be an Oscar contender, definitely, for Amanda Seyfried, and who plays Anne Lee, the leader and prophet of the Shaker religion. It's an interesting movie. I think it does try to do too many things.
Yes.
It suffers from a lack of focus. It tries to be a biopic sometimes, and then other times it just like says, "Oh, by the way, this immense thing happened in this person's life. Don't worry about it," and jumps around in time a little bit, not too badly.
It's basically chronological.
It's chronological,
and gives you dates on the screen.
Yes, but I think it jumps forward in time and then kind of elides some of what was going on historically. The American Revolution is barely touched on in this movie.
I don't think it mattered to the Shakers. I think that's the point.
They were non-participatory in the revolution.
Yeah.
But that meant there was a lot of conflict between them and local authorities. We see some of that, but not much.
There's a whole bunch of stuff we don't see. So, I mean,
Okay.
yeah, to kind of pull that out is like, sure, there's a bunch of stuff we don't see. Yeah, I mean, this movie suffers from it being a biopic, right? And as a biopic, it's trying to follow basically maybe 43 out of 48 years of this woman's life, while also being a biopic of a religion, like of a religious group. And so, yeah, in that sense, it's definitely doing too much. It covers too much of her life and doesn't touch on anything deeply in that sense, like in terms of events. And because it's not just a biopic of her, but it's also a biopic of the religion, like you have to understand something about the English context, and you have to understand a little bit about the American context when she comes to the U.S. in 1774, but like, yeah, in some ways those things are very lightly touched on because in some ways they don't matter to the person as the actor and to the broader story that's being told. The broader story that's being told is the story of an individual person and the story of a faith idea, which I'm dignifying with the words faith idea, but is basically a cult. Like, I was thinking about many things while I'm looking at this movie, and one of them is the NXIVM documentaries that we watched, the line between established religion. How do you get to be an established religion? You start off as an offshoot of something else that's crazy, that's blasphemous, or that's too wild or crazy or whatever, that has no credibility. And then it becomes established and has credibility. And what's the space between, the new offshoot that has no credibility and is wild and crazy versus something that we would call a cult that we don't ever dignify with, it. Yeah. The motives here are not culty in the sense of the motives are not personal, right? Like the motives are, I believe this great belief and I believe I have a gift to give to the world to tell this great belief. And there is no then desire for money or temporal power that goes along with it. And I guess that's the distinction between early religion and cult. But then established religion often gets mixed up with the desire for temporal power and corruption and all that other stuff, which clearly, none of which has anything to do with this movie, by the way.
Yeah, and clearly Shakerism has never gone down that road.
If there have been any Shaker scandals in that sense, I I don't know anything about them, but I
Uh,
also don't know anything about Shakers.
What
so,
we know
you
about Shakers is from reading the Wikipedia articles on the train ride home.
Well, the
So-
benefit I had was reading the Wikipedia article before the
Mhm.
movie, and it, like I read an article on the way home about the director is also the co-author, and she co-wrote it with her partner, who's the guy who directed The Brutalist.
Okay.
So it's like two movie people, directors and writers, wrote the movie, and she did, like, she got interested in the Shakers while she was making some other movie and did all this research. And so it very much feels like I have learned this story of this faith, and I want to share this story with you. And so it is very chronological. There is this unexpressed narrator that's kind of narrating the whole thing. And so it doesn't do a good job of a movie where the movie tells you the story. The reason you know the story, the reason you know when things are happening, is because there's this overarching narrator who is telling you, this woman has married this man, this woman has done this, she's been imprisoned in this place. And then the screen will tell you that the movie is divided into parts, and the parts are chronological, and what part of her life those parts are. So it has very much like an episodes of a documentary kind of feel in terms of the way the narrative works. But it's not a documentary. Like, some of this is not documentable, so you have to create the story to go along with it. But it does follow the documented facts mostly.
Some parts of the film are given to us in Ann Lee's personal perspective. So her visions and her the moment when she starts like levitating off the jail cell floor and so on, where it's clearly like this is her experience of a miraculous faith. Most of the movie is told through a sort of much more realist lens, which is trying to like be a traditional historical fiction movie. Like I said, it tries to do too many things at once. It also tries to be a musical, and I didn't find the music in this particularly compelling.
I did.
Okay, so I found it. So one of the reasons for that was the music is very much modern music, based on traditional Shaker spiritual songs. And it comes across not as like rock and roll or anything, although there is a moment of like weird electric guitar stings, which is fascinating. But it's very modern, sort of folk music-y kind of sounding. And that's a decision the director made, and I don't disagree with her altogether, but it didn't work for me.
For me, I actually thought it did. Like, it because it actually isn't just song, it's also dance. Like, it's physical, right? Like, the thing of the Shakers, not like I really knew this before reading the Wikipedia article, before watching the movie, right? But that they are, while they are like celibate and like disconnected from the body in some ways, they're also very connected to God moving through you, and God moving through you in the form of song and dance and verbal speaking in tongues and screaming and stuff, and just the kind of physical nature of God moving through the body. And so that's kind of stylized in some ways. That's the word I was struggling for on the way home. It's sometimes it's very like chaotic and like shown as chaotic, and sometimes it's stylized, and there's clearly choreographed dances, which apparently they actually did have, and the music is mostly these hymns, but then with the music updated and done in these choral ways, that clearly involve like planning and training and practice to put on the screen. But I actually really liked that element of it too, even though it wasn't I didn't necessarily believe that they choreographed all of these like elaborate dances in the woods kinds of things, but it definitely, I'm used to seeing a period piece of somebody in 18th century clothing where they are meant to be reserved, and even if it's like the like quick talking bodyish like maid or something in a downstairs upstairs thing in an 18th century context, everybody's restrained, everybody's polite, everybody's whatever. And even if there's going to be like religious music, it's restrained, right? So the fact that it's so physical, that the music is so odd in a way, I think actually conveys something, even though it's not the right music for 1774.
Interesting.
And so I that actually kind of did speak to me. And I love singing, I love dancing. I firmly believe that human beings are all wired for this, that's like what, people just always do in whatever context, whether, and I get that people in many cultural contexts want to turn their voices or turn their bodies over to God, and I felt like it kind of captured that feeling. But there's a lot of music, and there's too much of it, and because there's so much time devoted to the music, it sort of feels like, well, we have to have a narrator to narrate it because we just gave over like 40 minutes of a 2-hour and 20-minute movie to singing and dancing.
Right.
And so you can't tell the plot that way. So you have to literally tell the plot. And that, like,
there are times when I think that's done to good effect. I think that there's a sense in the movie of this is received scripture. And so we have Anne Lee's niece, sister?
Who are you talking about?
The one who does the direct address to the camera at the very beginning. Which says Anne Lee was born in Manchester.
Oh, with the eye. That's the... I
didn't want to say the
That's
eye
not the niece. That's her friend.
It's basically her disciple.
But it's like her close friend.
Yes. From
Manchester, her childhood friend.
Wikipedia suggested that she might be related to her. In some way. But it wasn't even clear in historical records. So this character exists for one reason, which is to occasionally look at the screen and say, Anne Lee was born in Manchester in 1736, or Anne Lee passed away at the age of 48. Her job is to be the disciple and to present the gospel of Anne Lee. And this is used to good effect one moment in the film. And I don't mean to suggest that it's not good otherwise, but it's a really good moment in this film where at one point she's relating this gospel, and at the same time you see the characters speaking the same words as the gospel, and you get this sense of this is not just a religious text, this is something that was actually happening in the real world. The movie does a lot of this sort of thing. I think, again, never quite connects with it. The direct address to the audience really feels forced. But I can see with why they wanted to do that. So I think that it's a good movie. I really don't want to just dwell on its faults. But it did make me think of two movies that did this better. And, made me think of one and made you think of one. So mine is a movie that was billed as a horror movie called Saint Maud, which is very good. It's not really a horror movie. It's about an incredibly religious young woman who has been deeply traumatized physically and has turned to religion to cope with that. And she is a home health aide and ends up terrorizing the woman that she's supposed to be caring for in the name of religion. It's all done very carefully in the movie. It's not as tawdry as that sounds. And then the end of the movie is incredibly shocking. I won't talk about it here. But it's a movie where the director very subtly cuts back and forth between this young woman's religious vision of her own life, including miraculous things happening, and a very naturalistic, realistic, lens that is capturing what is actually happening. And the filmmaker is clever enough to be able to make sure the viewer knows which is which. Whereas in Testament of Anne Lee, I think there's a sort of blurring of that, where the question of the miraculous stuff, which is very thin in Testament of Anne Lee, it's not a huge part of the movie, but the miraculous stuff and the visions and prophecies and the realist stuff kind of get blurred together and
Which
never
I think,
really examined.
I think that's part of the point, right? Like, to see it from her perspective is to see a world that blurs those things.
But so Saint Maud does this to very effective measures of switching back and forth between those two things, whereas this movie just kind of wants you to say, miracles were happening, or people were interpreting it that way, and we're not going to interrogate what that means. The other movie that you thought of, and then I was like, oh yeah, and I could see all the really good parallels, is Sinners.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Sinners is a musical, right? Like, this movie has way, way more music in it than Sinners did.
Does it?
Yeah.
Maybe more musical numbers, but I think Sinners actually lets the musical numbers play out in their entirety.
So does this movie. I mean, I would be interested to put numbers to it, but this movie felt like it had more songs, longer songs, that played all the way through.
Yeah, okay, I can see it, yeah.
And nothing else happened while the music was happening, right? Like, there's nothing else is happening in the plot. You're just watching people engage in religious experience, right, is basically what most of the music is.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is one scene in this movie and one musical sequence in this movie and one musical sequence in Sinners. So once the Shakers come to the New World, they come to New York. They don't go to Boston, right? Like, they don't go to Connecticut. They come to New York, and they go up the Hudson River to a place south of Albany. And so you see them in having this, like, just ecstatic religious experience in the woods in the dark. And you get these, there's like little bits of fires and stuff so that there's some reason for there to be some light for you to sort of be able to see some of them. And it's after the community is really grown, so there's actually a lot of people. Where through most of the movie, it's a few people or like a room full of people going through these ecstatic experiences. And so there's a song, and they're dancing, and there's some choreographed dancing to it, like where people are dancing in sequence and dancing together. But there's multiple choreographies going on because the group is so big. And it reminded me of the Rocky Road to Dublin. No, is that the right song?
Yeah,
it's the Rocky Road to Dublin sequence in Sinners, where you've got everyone who's entranced by the vampire singing a song that most of them shouldn't know, and
with Remick leading.
With Remick leading it, and the point of the Shakers is there is no one person in these ecstatic moments leading the worship. Everybody is going through the same experience. And that's sort of what's supposed to be happening in the Rocky Road to Dublin sequence, right? Like, he's like getting everybody to be able to go through this together. Look, we're a family, we're united.
Yeah.
But it's perverted because they're not. They're just repeating what he wants them to know and believe and feel. But I don't know. It reminded me of it. But in our conversation now, the other movie I'm thinking of is Harriet. The Harriet Tubman movie with Cynthia Erivo, which I felt also really, really struggled to convey the mystical. And there were these moments where she also like had these visions, or, if you know Harriet Tubman's story, are kind of thought to have been like a head injury that she had, right? And that she interpreted like, these problems that she had from that as like spells and messages from God. And it just felt wrong in that movie. It just like really couldn't convey the mystical at all. It was just like bizarre. And there was also some singing in that. And I not until we started talking about it, with the camera on, did I remember that movie. And so this has some elements of that, like, because it also struggles to convey the mystical. Like, it's almost like the music and the dancing is a metaphor for the mystical because they can't convey that. And I'm sure that must be conveyable on film somehow. I don't know how it would be, but I'm also not a filmmaker, right? But I feel like somebody must be able to kind of convey that better. And as a metaphor for the mystical, I really liked the music and the dancing and the choreography, particularly, that went with the dancing. But as a literal representation of how, these incredibly religiously entranced people saw the world, I couldn't quite see it through their eyes. I saw someone telling me their eyes. I didn't see it through their eyes, which I think the movie wanted to do. I felt like it did a lot better with the body and the earth and the idea that Anne Lee becomes this bigger spiritual leader while she was religiously inclined before this. And according to one of the Wikipedia articles I read, that her parents were actually in this Quaker offshoot in Manchester. But that, she wasn't particularly interested in getting married, but you got married because you're supposed to. Marries this guy, has 4 kids very quickly, and all of them die. Mm-hmm. And after they die, she, gets this clear idea that, like, this is, the wages of sin in a way, right? That, like, this earthiness that goes with sex is one of the core problems, and that, true saints, basically, although that's not the language they use, but, true saints would step away from that. So the movie does a really, really good job of conveying her repulsion at sex through these graphic sex scenes with her husband, and her experience of giving birth to these 4 children, which you see, and and see her grief about some of them, and just it's very, like, graphic and body embodied, and this sense of the need to remove yourself from the body and why you would want to do that. I got this real sense of, like, just what would this woman be? This, like, passionate, in terms of, like, intrinsically motivated, passionate, like, thoughtful, bold, dominant woman in a world where birth control existed, where treatment for mental illness existed, and in some ways fewer options existed because you can't just, like, scutter off to America and, like, build a whole new life. Like, that kind of shit is a lot harder to do now. But you have a life that has more options and choices because people have more bodily autonomy at the moment. Like, I just, I'm fascinated by this woman. Like, I see why the director was fascinated by this woman, and how little, like, she was illiterate. She never wrote anything down. The Shakers around her didn't write down her words, because that's not how they rolled, right? So you're creating, anybody who's going to write a story about her or film a story about her is creating a story for her. So that's, this has the challenges of that. But, I get why you would want to tell a story of this woman, because she's bug fuck crazy.
Well, and fascinating historically.
She is fascinating historically. She is bug fuck crazy. She is, like, bug fuck crazy in, like, in an 18th century perspective of a woman who wants to do things that are unwomanly and, like, wants to shake up the world. And from my, like, DSM 4 or 5 or wherever we're at version, like, also got something diagnosable, like.
But also was able, through sheer power of will to make that happen.
Yeah.
She did change things.
Yes, absolutely.
In a way that most women in her era were not able to do.
That most humans don't ever do,
Yeah.
period, in any era.
It's interesting. The movie really wants Anne Lee to be relatable
Mm-hmm.
and even admirable. And I think that it soft pedals some of her wilder claims, like that she was the second coming of Jesus Christ, or that
She says this in the movie
she
more
said
than
it, but
once.
then the movie doesn't dwell on it. Whereas that would have been so shocking in 1750, whenever it was, that like there's real violence in this movie. There are
Yes.
scenes of extraordinary violence done against women, and it is shocking at times. But there's also a sort of weightlessness to that, in that we don't get a sense of context. We don't get a sense of the people being violent against the Shakers are just evil, and they're just people who come out of nowhere to be violent. And there's no sense of what is this doing to the social order? What is this doing to, there's this question, like I said, that the revolution is barely mentioned, and we get this idea the Quakers are just not going to get involved in the revolution. Fine, but then why don't there's nobody in the movie who takes the other side of that discussion or that debate. The Shakers were right. Well, no, they weren't. I mean, we know that. I don't know. We then get Anne Lee saying, "Good, I'm glad that the revolution ended in the favor of the Americans. Good for them." The jerk Christians in England will get what's coming to them.
Well, and that there be religious freedom, like here in this country. But yeah, I felt like those kinds of moments were what was suffering from we have to do a biopic of the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's no time to develop like who all the different elements that they would be dealing with. Like, they come to New York, they set up this community, and then they're like, and then she goes on this tour around hundreds of miles and, talks to zillions of people. And they show you a little map that shows you her going across Massachusetts and Connecticut. Like, even though it's the 1770s, this is still the heartland of, like, the Puritans who will kick your ass for saying the shit that she said, right? And, like, just all sorts of people who wouldn't have accepted her message. And, in fact, like, part of the actual historical record is that some of, you see violence against her and violence against the whole group because of what they say. But it happened over and over and over again, and they kept going. Right? And so it's like the whole movie could have been their time from 1774 to the end of her life without explaining how they got there. And they still wouldn't have covered everything that was going on, right? Or if they just explained how she got to the point of getting on the boat and leaving England, it still wouldn't have explained everything that needed to be explained, because it's then, what does this faith do when they, it's too big a task for a movie.
Yep.
It's too big a task for a movie. And, it's the problem of any biopic when you really are trying to get the scope of this person's life. The first time you see the character, she's like 7.
Yeah. So, again, the movie tries to do too many things, and it doesn't totally succeed at any of them, but it does add up pretty well to a really impressive piece of film.
It is a really impressive piece of filmmaking. There are some very impressive performances in it.
Amanda Seyfried just carries the whole thing. There's no question.
Yeah, I mean, she's on screen for a decent portion of the film. Yeah.
Lewis Pullman as her brother is the supporting actor of the movie, and he is good, but again, doesn't get enough screen time. He gets like one big tangent of the film where he clearly had a huge part to play in all of this.
Yes.
But the movie's got her name in the title.
Yeah.
So we're going to go back and stick with her.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, she's got a Wikipedia article, and he does not.
Yeah, fair enough. So, any final thoughts about Testament of Anne Lee before we wrap this up?
The very last dance sequence in the movie that's at her funeral is astounding.
Yeah.
And astoundingly shot, and apparently based on, like,
Actual
choreography.
Shaker, services.
Yeah. And is shot from above, and is just gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of that in this movie. And yeah, it's worth seeing, especially for like you were like, oh yeah, I want to see this, and I'm like, why do I want to see a movie about like early, I'm like, I'm not even sure what Shakers are, and like early American religion, like what, like, huh? Yeah. I get it. Like, I get why you would learn this story and want to make it into a movie, and even if it doesn't quite work, like, it works well enough that it's a movie that's absolutely worth seeing.
And I think historically it's important enough for as part of American history that gets glossed over all the time. The religious history of America is a fascinating subject that we totally ignore in favor of the Revolution and the founders and the Constitution and all these things.
Well, we think about it as one simple narrative story.
Yeah.
Religious freedom, Puritans, Pilgrims, as if those are the same thing, which they are not.
They're not.
And then that is the story of the northeastern U.S.
Right.
And then if you grew up in the state of Maryland, there's some Catholics in there. Mm-hmm. If you grew up in Pennsylvania, there's some Quakers in there. Yeah. But, like, I didn't know until this that the Shakers are basically Quaker heretics.
Yes.
Like, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that the Quakers had, like, groups and divisions, right? Like, but of course they did, because all religious groups do.
So my family is partly descended from Quakers, so this was of interest to me because I'd heard a lot about the Shakers. But yeah, I can see why you were a little skeptical.
I mean,
we're glad we went, right?
Had not a clue. Yeah, no, I'm very glad that we went.
Excellent.
But yeah, like thinking about the religious history of even the northeastern part of the U.S. is really very complicated and more female driven than most people know.
Yeah.
And I knew that and still didn't know about Ann Lee and the Shakers.
Right.
So what else don't I know?
Okay.
A shit
ton. Recommended.
Yes.
With reservations. It's not perfect. It's not Sinners.
Well, I mean, nothing is Sinners, and nothing's perfect.
Nothing will ever be Sinners again.
I mean, Sinners is not perfect. So,
Sinners still the best movie of 2026.
No. We haven't seen it in 2026.
Well, you're going to at some point.
Why?
You're going to watch Sinners again.
I don't know. I haven't watched it on TV yet.
Okay. You love that movie.
I do.
Okay.
I'm not going to compare it. I'm not going to compare every movie to Sinners either. Like,
you kind of can.
I suppose the next vampire movie we see, I'll compare to Sinners,
Okay.
and the next religious people dancing in the woods movie I see, I'll compare to Sinners and to this movie.
Okay. Thanks for sticking with us. I know we've been away for a little bit, but we're glad to have you back, and we are ready and raring to see more movies in 2026 and let you know what we thought.
Yep.
So, until next time.
Farewell.
Bye.